This video tutorial is to instruct the user on how to synchronize features and tools when two data sets are open at the same time in CubeVue. This video was recorded using CubeVue version 3.0. The ability to synchronize features and controls is new to CubeVue version 3.0. As a reminder, in order to open two different data sets at the same time, you must first have one data set open, then go back to your patient list. Check the box under Load option where it says Load into Second Workspace, then select your second data set to open and open it as well. When the second data set is open, you will then see the two different data sets displayed side by side. This is your default view. This is the 2x1 view. You have other options such as the 1x2 view, not necessarily as practical as the 2x1 view, and you can also select the both views where you can switch back and forth between both views. But again, the preferred default view is the 2x1 where you can compare side by side. Once you have both data sets open, you can switch control and work with either set individually by simply clicking on whichever data set you would like to work on. Or you can synchronize certain tools and features so that both sets of images change at the same time. In order to do that, go to the upper left corner and check the box where it says Synchronized Series. The Series Synchronization control window will then open. Looking at the overall layout, we see our controls are grouped by type. We have the general image controls such as zoom, pan zoom, the split controls. We have 2D controls working within the slabs and the MPR views themselves, and we also have 3D controls. We also have the checkboxes under REL or relative, and also for absolute. And there's also now buttons where you can click and activate those controls immediately without having to go back to the toolbar. Starting at the top, if we want to synchronize the zoom to fit control by clicking now and observing the different images, you can see that some of the images grew larger and some of them grew smaller, depending on how much zoom was originally applied to them. But both series are now synchronized at the same level of zoom, which is at the zoom to fit level. If we check the box for Reset Pan Zoom and click Now, we can see now that all of the images in both data sets have been synchronized and they are at the same zoom level as if you clicked individually on the Reset Pan to Zoom control. If you have adjusted the splits, which are the white lines that adjust the window size here, and you'd like to get them back to their original equal size for all four windows, we're going to click on Reset Splits, Apply Now, and as you can see, the split lines, again the white lines between the different viewing windows, have all reset to the default positions. Now you'll notice that some controls, such as zoom, we have the ability to adjust relative, in other words, the first data set relative to the second one. We can clearly see that the first data set, the one on the left, is larger at this time in terms of zoom factor than the one on the right. So if I zoom relative first to the second, that proportion is going to be maintained. By synchronizing now, adjusting relative, the first one still stays larger relative to the second one. If I check absolute, however, they are both going to zoom at the same factor, meaning both are going to zoom to the same size and then increase or decrease at the same time, depending on how the zoom control is applied. Pan will work in the same way. I'm just going to pan these objects one side or the other. If I pan relative to each other, they're going to maintain their same relative position in the viewing window. But if I'm going to pan them absolute, they are both going to synchronize in this case in terms of where they are within the viewing window. Reset Slabs works the same way. When we synchronize it, both sets of slab lines will return to their original thickness and also their original default positions within the viewing windows. Invert Grayscale works the same way. Again, selecting to synchronize that, we can see that the grayscale has been inverted on both windows at the same time. Probably one of the most useful tools to synchronize is the ability to page or scroll through the different slices at the same time. I've positioned my coronal view so I'm looking at the very back of the calcaneus, and let's just enlarge these images at the same time. I'm going to synchronize the paging of one data set relative to the other. So now I'm going to slowly scroll through the data sets, and I can see I'm roughly at the same place, synchronized, looking through the calcaneus of the left foot and the right foot at the same time. This can be exceptionally useful if you're comparing things such as a pre- and post-surgery scan. If you happen to have a left foot with pathology and a right foot without, and you scan them separately, would you like to view them at the same time? You can scroll through them both at the same time. And again, you can do this in a full screen view like you see here. Now when you're paging absolute, what's going to happen is whichever one you take control of, the other data set is going to immediately jump to the same place, not necessarily within the anatomy, but within the entire data set as a whole. So if you had one patient that was scanned where the foot is slightly slid more forward on the platform than the other, then you're going to see a shift, and you're going to see the paging is going to be relative to the entire data set, including any air spaces that might be ahead of or behind the foot in question. So let's take a quick look at that. I am paging absolute, and this is the entire data set, not just the anatomy, but the entire data set, including any air space that might have been behind the calcaneus. Looking at window level, again we have a choice between relative and absolute. So selecting relative, they're going to maintain their same degree of contrast and brightness relative to each other. So as we can see here, when I'm making the adjustment, decreasing contrast, increasing contrast, and then we also have brighter or darker. But when we go to absolute, they will both jump to the same window level, and then they will both adjust the same amount at the same time. When it comes to MPR rotation, again, relative means that whatever position one of these feet is oriented in with respect to the other, it's going to maintain that same degree of relative rotation. If, however, you select absolute, you're going to be controlling one, and the other one will jump to the same position of orientation as the other. And this again is with respect to the entire data set, not the anatomy. So however the entire data set on the left is oriented when you select absolute, the entire data set, including whatever relative rotation might be there on that second foot scan, will also synchronize with respect to the other foot. And again, you don't have to work on just the left foot, you can also work on the right foot. Looking now at rendering type, we see in the example on the left we have the bone and transparent skin rendering type, and on the right hand side we have the default CB bone. If we'd like to synchronize them both so they're both displaying the same rendering type, then whichever one we have selected and then click now, the other one will default to that same rendering type. The render scaling synchronization will allow you to simultaneously adjust the HU or density value appearance in each of the 3D renderings at the same time. So you can appear to add or take away soft tissue in both 3D renderings at the same time. You will, however, run into a bit of a problem if one of your scans does not have metal, but the other one does. In which case, the scan that has the metal has a much greater density range because of the metal is much denser material compared to the scan that does not have any metal in it. So just be aware that if you try to do a render scaling adjustment, whether it be relative or absolute, and one of your scans does not have metal and the other one does, then your adjustment is going to significantly throw things off. And you will appear to add or take away softer tissue at a greatly accelerated rate. If you synchronize your dataset filters, that means you're applying either a smooth, normal, or sharp filter to both sets of grayscale or 2D images at the same time. The last tool on our synchronization controls is rotation. If we were to, example, have one data set where it's rotated roughly 90 degrees with respect to the other or relative to the other, and then we select relative rotation, that same degree of rotation of one relative to the other is maintained. If we were to synchronize and rotate them absolutely, then the original data sets will line up and they will both synchronize. One data set will be absolutely in sync with the other. Something to keep in mind is that the check marks will remain even if you close and then open the window again at a later time. And even if you close the software and reopen it, again, your checkmark settings will remain. This video was recorded using CubeVue version 3.0. The ability to view two scans at the same time was available in some previous versions of CubeVue, but the ability to synchronize controls is new to CubeVue version 3.0. If you would like to upgrade to CubeVue version 3.0 or whatever the current version of CubeVue happens to be sure to contact CurveBeam technical support for an appointment. Upgrades to any software is done by appointment only.